this country is because women vote and they're too emotional to vote. Okay? Alright, welcome to Notes from the Pulpit. This is the companion edition podcast to the main show, the Family Pulpit Podcast. And this is another mobile edition. I'm struggling to find time to do podcasts. And back when I kind of started doing these Notes from the Pulpit companions, I realized that driving into work gives me a lot of free time where I'm not utilizing that time well, and a lot of time where I have by myself. So I'm back to it again today. So you're just going to have to try to overlook the sound of the engine and the tires. And we did try to record our episode that we owed on Feminism Part 3. If you haven't followed the main show, where we're at now is we've been walking historically through the rise of feminism in America especially. And the reason that we've been doing that is kind of built on the four main influences that have changed the family dynamics and changed the way we view work. And I know we've repeated these over and over again, but we're kind of trying to drill them out there. Is Platonism is the first underlying principle. He had some things that he said regarding the division between the material and the immaterial, or the physical and the spiritual. That kind of duality downstream of that has really been the driving influence over the white collar versus blue collar, the manual labor and physical labor versus the kind of intellectual type of activities. And then we looked at the Industrial Revolution. Now this was the main driver. When the Industrial Revolution came along, it really destroyed the family. It separated it. They essentially traded the farm for the factory, sold their family farm, moved into the city, all of the family, and really all of them ended up working in a factory of some sort or in some sort of industrial job, including the children and the women. So then downstream of that, the next step is you have feminism. Why? Because, feminism comes along and they say we don't like the labor practices that are being handed out to women, the long hours, the dangerous jobs. We want equal rights, equal pay, all of these sorts of things eventually come along. But the first main thing that comes up was voting rights. And we talked about that as part of the first wave feminism in our first and second episodes on feminism. The last episode we looked at three main reactions to that first wave feminism. And there's a common misconception, I think, when it comes to discussing voting rights, when it comes to discussing feminism. I think it's framed in terms of women versus men. And that is not the case. Historically, that's not the case. There were women who were actually out fighting against women's rights in the workplace. And the reason was because they wanted the woman to have rights in the home. They wanted to restore the maternalist instinct of the woman. And that's what they were called, the maternalists. They wanted to push for the women to get back into the home and then the state to come along and support that endeavor. So the maternalist idea was good. However, they still wanted women to be subordinate to the state. So it's kind of like they changed the classical viewpoint of women being, I'm going to use the word, but don't be offended by it necessarily, women being subordinate to their husband or to men, and they shifted that to be subordinate to the state. And that's big. That was a big movement. So we talked about that in the first and second episodes, and then the third one that we started to record the other day, we actually had it going quite well, and the computer ran out of memory, and I'm looking at Ezra like, dude, who is on here all the time filling up memory? Well, got that straightened out. Unfortunately, we don't have that podcast ready because it cut off after 18 minutes, and we were at least 25 minutes, maybe 30 down the road before we realized that the error had happened and it wasn't recording anymore. So we're going to try to get that. I think I'm driving on ice here, so hang on just a second. We're going to try to get that recorded and back out, because episode 3 of feminism, it's not going to be primarily focused on the subject itself, but it's going to be focused on those reactions again. And this was a big one. It was liberalism or the social gospel response to the Industrial Revolution and feminism. And then the fundamentalists, the rise of the fundamentalists. So if you've ever heard about that old late 1800, early 1900 argument between liberalism and liberalism and fundamentalism, this is the basis. This is the foundation. I had no idea. I thought it was all doctrinal. I thought it was because, some people just rose up and they started to come up with some weird doctrinal ideas. And then some other guys were like, well, those are false. And you kind of split off into camps. No, it was a direct response to the Industrial Revolution and then a response to feminism and the problems that society had, the societal ills, we might say, or the societal sins would be what they called it. So that's on deck. I had to do a bunch of research on that because I thought I knew, even having sort of a class on that where I had to read a few books. They presented it with the doctrinal lens, and that's not the background for it. So what I want to jump on today and talk about is a bit controversial, I know, because in social media, in certain circles, whether they be religious or Christian circles or whether they be political circles, and we know, given the state of what's going on today, there's a lot of overlap that's happening between so-called Christian or religious circles and political circles. And I've talked about this a lot in the past. I've written on this a ton at the old website, voiceoftruthblog.com. I haven't migrated a lot of those over to the new site, familypulpit.com, just yet, but you can still go over and look. Look up Christian nationalism, look up political gospel. All of those subjects are going to bring you articles that I've written that I do not agree with this overlap of Christianity with politics. But one of the main things that they've been talking about, kind of subtly, and it'll pop up every now and then, it'll get people upset, and then it'll disappear for a little bit. But it's directly related to our subject of feminism, is the 19th Amendment, the right to vote, women's suffrage. And what I don't want to have happen is what we were saying as we walked through the historical developments of this in our last two episodes, and then even made some statements about it. I don't want us to be lumped in with those who are saying the state that we're in today, the condition that we're in today in this country, is because women vote and they're too emotional to vote. Okay? So what brought this to mind, was a local politician, local to me, by the name of Derrick Evans. And Derrick Evans, I don't know him, but he has a fairly large following on social media, and he was elected as a delegate for the state back in that election of 2020. So his term would have started in 2021. But he went to the January 6th Capitol, what they've called an insurrection. You may know my feelings about that. But anyway, he was there, got caught up in that, and ended up spending some time in jail. So he had to resign or was fired or whatever as a delegate of the state. And as a result of being in prison on January 6th, you can imagine he kind of had the martyr label, especially within the MAGA movement, and developed quite a following. Well, I think it was February 4th, he makes a statement about how we need to repeal the 19th Amendment because women are too emotional to vote. And I read a comment or two. I didn't dive into this deeply because I just wanted to hit on the main topic there. But I read a comment or two, and he's essentially saying that women are susceptible to the Democrat Party's emotional appeal. So the Democrat Party, I think because they want to be pro-women's rights, which we know means pro-abortion. They want to be pro-healthcare, which we know means pro-trans types things and abortion, all this stuff, whatever. And don't get me wrong. I'm not for one party or the other necessarily. I would lean conservative in politics and values, but I don't align with the stuff that's been going on for the last 20 years. So anyway, he's making this argument and saying, you know what, we should repeal this. And this isn't different than what I've heard before in Christian circles. So Derrick is making it from a political side or in that political circle. But I've heard also people like Joel Webbin make this argument as well. And what the angle that they're coming at this from is like a strong, heavy hand. Derrick might not be. He may be just coming from a logical, in his mind, political ideal that just says, men need to be the ones who are voting here. Okay, whatever. But that overlapping circle with Christianity, they're coming from a strong patriarchal angle. And I don't like a lot of the things that they say. They're not viewing the woman as the man's help necessarily. They oftentimes frame their arguments as though the woman is more than subordinate to them. And I think that's their intention too. I've heard them talk about this a lot. And I don't want what we were talking about in episode 1 and 2 to come across that way. What I was talking about and how this thing was originally set up, and really how it should be, it'll never be again, but how it should be set up is pro-family. So what we talked about in our episodes was that from a family perspective, should there be individuals in the family that go cast their own vote? No, there shouldn't be. Why? Well, because this is a major point of division for families today. Dividing on politics. You guys know the old statements, like you never go to someone's house for dinner and you never talk politics and religion. You don't talk politics and religion. Why? Because it's divisive, right? Like it's known, it's well known. Well, in a family, if you've got 2 or 3 political candidates and everyone in that family is treating themselves as an individual, and they're like, yeah, you know what, I'm going to go vote for this guy, and I'm going to go vote for this guy. We know the rise of identity politics. We know what's taken place to create division, to create hatred. In fact, let me throw this in there. I wasn't even planning to talk about this. I'm not going to spend time on it, but I am going to mention it because it's kind of crazy. But yesterday, a father, I hope I get the story right because I didn't read it, but I saw the headline. A father of the Conservative Party, MAGA Republican, shot his own daughter. I don't know if he killed her, but he did shoot her over an argument about something that was said over Trump. Do you see? Like, it's crazy. And what's happening is that the media, social media, all of these things, they want to have these political arguments, these political divisions, identity politics, to create an atmosphere for a civil war. And what I'm simply saying is that can't begin in the home. You can't have the mini civil war in the home that then sets the stage for something larger. So in the home, you should be one voice. You should be one movement. It shouldn't be we're all individuals doing our own thing here, but we're a collection. We're a family. We're a unit. That's actually how the family should function. If you go back to the garden and you look, God created Adam by himself, okay? Right? And this is familiar to us. We know Adam's in the garden. He's by himself. God brings the animals to him, said, hey, Adam, name the animals. And Adam starts naming off the animals, right? And then God says, you know what? And it's not like he had an afterthought here. This is just part of the plan and development. Hang on a second. And he says, it's not good for man to be alone. So from Adam, from his very rib, God fashions woman, right? So Ish and Isha, going back to those original words, is from man. Woman, from man. She was a part of man. She comes from him. So just as the original woman came from man, all men now come from woman. There is a symbiotic relationship there that God created. He did. Not only that, but then back to the garden, when God says he makes woman to be man's help. In the King James, I think it's still, unless there's been some sort of change, used to call it help meet. And we have a little bit of trouble with this, understanding what this means. It's more than a companion. It means that they're supposed to be hand in glove. They're supposed to be complementary. They're supposed to essentially be mirror images of each other with, of course, responsibility given to the man because he was the first created. He's essentially the king and she's essentially his queen. And together, they were supposed to take dominion and subdue the earth. And guess what? Be fruitful and multiply. Man can't do that on his own, and neither can woman. They were supposed to be a unit, a team. And then the kids were supposed to come along, and all of them together were supposed to work towards that dominion. That's the original setup. It wasn't individual pieces. In fact, I could make the argument that the reason why they were kicked out of the garden was because they were acting as individual pieces, not as a family unit. And the same thing with the brothers, right? Like Cain should have never been filled with such jealousy and hostility towards Abel if he had been functioning as a family unit. Like, we're in this together, brother. You raise the sheep, I raise the vegetables. We're a team. But he got jealous because he offered his work without faith, without that work worship dynamic. So back to the politics of voting. What we're saying in those two podcasts as we walk through the history of it is that ideally the way that this should have been, and I think it was, but it got abused a lot, is that in the family home, the husband would have been the representative head. The husband or the father would have been the representative head, right? Like this shouldn't be controversial because guess what? It's a representative republic. The home should have been functioning as a representative republic. That's how this country was founded, not as a democracy, not as a majority rule. That's what gets you into trouble, but as a representative republic. So what does that mean? That means that the husband would have gone to cast the vote for the family. And Ezra brought up the question, well, how would you determine this? Does this mean that the majority in the household would have voted, cast their vote, and then the husband or the father would have gone and cast it based on the majority, or he would have had the tie-breaking vote? No, it's not might makes right. It's not majority. It's consensus. So the way that this should have been is consensus. What does that mean? So let's say you have a candidate, and you've got 5 people in the home, okay? So 3 of them want to say, well, we need to cast our vote for this guy over here. And the other 2 are like, no, we need to cast our vote for this guy over here. So what do? What does the leader of the family do if you've got division, right? Because you can hear how contentious that could be. Well, first of all, as a leader of the family, there needs to be some involved discussion about these candidates. And I don't think we do that. And as parents, as even growing up myself as a child, this is a real weakness. We send everybody out as individuals to the voting booth without being informed about the situations that are going on. Really, we do. And we say, oh, go cast your own vote. And then it's a popularity contest at that point, right? It's high school homecoming king or queen. It's not really an informed decision. And then logically thinking downstream, what are the consequences of that decision? And really, at a national level, the discussion needs to be had, hey, you know what? Both of these candidates are pretty bad. And I don't feel like it's a good, responsible decision to choose the lesser of 2 evils. That never works out well. At the end of the day, it's still a choice of evil. So to inform the family about the different responsible decisions that are going to be made, and then work through the issue. The other thing is, guess what? There's nothing that says that you have to go cast that vote. If I couldn't get consensus, if I couldn't get to a unanimous decision, you know what I'd do? Fine, we'll pause it. We'll come back to this later. And what's wrong with that? I would rather preserve the family than to go forward and create division because I went rogue out on my own and made a decision. So what I think was happening prior to the 19th Amendment is there was a lot of abuse that was taking place. I don't doubt it. There were women who were being abused and daughters who were being abused. And largely what has to happen is, or what should have happened is, that family head vote, or that family head, should have been tied to property. That way, let's say that a husband dies and a father dies, okay? And he leaves his wife and kids behind. Well, who becomes the heir to the land? Well, as you know, like in the story of Ruth and those sorts of situations like that back in times of Israel, they're looking for the next available family member, right? If a brother dies, his brother now has the right to marry his wife, his widowed wife, and carry on that family line. We don't really do that today. But what would happen is, or should happen is, the woman becomes the principal landowner. She takes place until she remarries or something else happens. She becomes the head of the household. She becomes the head of the family. And you can go back to the Old Testament and you can see the argument that's brought to Moses of the 4 sisters, right? Their dad dies and they are left without land. And they make an appeal like, look, what are we supposed to do? This was our land. This was our family land. And we don't have a brother and we don't have other male family members and our dad has died. It should be our land. And you know what? God takes that to Moses and God's like, Moses takes that to God and God's like, that's their land. That's what I'm arguing for. And I don't think it took place prior to the 19th Amendment. I think there was a lot of women were held back and weren't allowed to hold ownership of property whatsoever. And what I'm not arguing for is that women holding their own property within the family with the husband and the father. I'm not arguing for that. That's individualism, and that's what's wrecking the country and has wrecked the country and the family. The individualism has wrecked the family. What I'm saying is, collectively, as landholders, the land would be both the husband and the wife's, and then subsequently the kids. That's how it should be structured. All of the family should take ownership in that land process, and if the husband dies, it should fall to the woman. She should then be the lead property owner, and she then would be the head of the household and be responsible to cast that vote. So what the 19th Amendment did, there were women who were fighting against it, and there were women who were fighting for it. And what it did is it sounds good, it sounds right, but if you look at it historically, what it was really trying to do is it was trying to separate the woman from the family and put her out on her own. A lot of these women who fought for this, they had a lot of relationship problems. I think I mentioned Mary Wollstonecraft. That's Mary Shelley's, I may not have her first name right, but that's Mary Shelley's mom. She was one of the first feminists over in England who was trying to fight against coverture laws. Coverture meant that the woman was under the head or the covering of a man. She couldn't be sued. She was protected, essentially. She couldn't be sued. Charges could be brought against her. She wouldn't be liable to any damages of any sort because the husband was protecting her. She was essentially protected by the family. Well, she had a ton of issues. Issues with relationships, issues with having children out of wedlock. And the surprising thing is that a lot of these early feminists were the same. They had the same patterns. And it's sort of like that they almost swung the pendulum because of all the trouble they had and wanted everybody else to get all the other women to kind of suffer along with them, maybe to get other women in their camp. Just go back and take a look at these issues. It wasn't driven by pure motives, I don't think. And were things perfect? No, they weren't. Like I said, there's abuses. There will be abuses again. But I'm not making the argument, and our podcast wasn't making the argument from a pro-patriarchal perspective. 3 P's in a row. Try that. I disagree with what they're trying to say. I'm not trying to promote the dominant husband or father in the family. What I'm trying to promote is the family, the woman as the help, and then as a unit, they're going out to subdue and take dominion. And we still have those individual pieces. We've talked about this on the podcast, and we will coming up in the future episodes as well. We still have individual pieces. Like right now, I'm driving in my truck to go to work as an individual. My kids aren't there learning from me. My wife isn't coming alongside me to help me. I'm by myself. And I go and make a living that I bring back to the family. And we kind of baptize that and say, yeah, see, this is how the family's supposed to be structured. No, it's not. I'm an individual cog in this wheel, in the system. The way that it should be set up is I'm at home in some sort of function there as a business or as some sort of trades, or I've got something going on there where I'm training my children in how to work this. I'm training them to how to deal with the world financially. I'm training them with how to work hard alongside them. I'm not just simply telling them these things and then hoping that they pick this up in school, a public school somewhere, and then in college by some other person that's been trained by feminists somewhere. No. To maintain the family unit, it has to be consistent. It can't be individual pieces and parts. I may also be driving on ice here, but that's basically what I wanted to talk about today. Just discussing some of the issues and outcries and the controversy that came up from Derrick Evans' statement. And what I think is remarkable, one final note, assuming that I don't slide off into a creek here. A lot of the people that were commenting on this and posting this on Facebook, that's where I saw it. It was a screenshot, I think, from X. Were women, of course. And when Derrick Evans makes that statement, like women shouldn't be allowed to vote because they're too emotional or whatever, susceptible to emotions, that, of course, in of itself is an emotional post. It's designed to elicit emotions. But then the women that are responding are making emotional responses. And I'm like, man, it's just a vicious cycle here. Neither side is really helping themselves out here. So go back and look. Go back and listen to our 2 episodes. We tried to do a good job of covering this historically about how this came to be. And then leading up, we'll jump into these issues of social gospel and fundamentalism, see how they were responses to industrial revolution and feminism. And then we're going to dive into the second wave. Now that's where things really drastically change in this country for women. That's your Equal Rights Amendment. That's your Margaret Sanger's. That's your abortion care, Planned Parenthood, the pill, monumental. All of these things that fall under today as women's rights, so-called women's rights, they crush the family. They crush the woman. So if you're driving, if you're a woman and you're listening to this and you're driving into work today, I know what you're thinking. I know what your pain is. I've seen endless, countless women who are saying, why do I have to go into work? Why am I not staying home? Why am I not home? A lot of them are saying, why am I not home with my kids? But some of them are saying, why do I have to do this? Why am I going in? I can't go work 40 to 60 hours in a hospital or go work as a teacher and then have to do the grading and all the assignments and the planning and the preparations and then try to come home and take care of my house and kids. Guess why? Guess why you can't do that? You weren't made to do it. You weren't designed to do that. That's why you're frustrated. That's why it feels like such a heavy burden and you're actually working multiple jobs, because you are. You're working multiple vocations and it's exhausting you. And what we're trying to do, what we're trying to establish in our podcast is the basics, going back to the foundation and showing how these things came to be so that we don't just assume the inherited position. Well, this is just how things are. The man goes off to work, the woman goes off to work, the kids go off to school, we meet back together at the dinner table, we go to athletics a couple days a week and on the weekends, and that's just how life is. We take a vacation and we're just living it up. I'm trying to break out of that. I need to make a personal decision and pull myself drastically out of it. But that's the foundation. That's what I'm talking about. So how does it relate to the voting, the 19th Amendment we were talking about? Because it's a unit. It's a family unit. Family together, not individuals. That's all I got. We'll catch you on the next one.